Hi everyone, this is Sophie from Prospology. I'm here today with Samantha, and I'll let you give a little intro to people in a moment. Um, but yeah, the purpose of this video is because we've started to get an interest in prospology from medical writers who are based in Singapore. And I know, Samantha, that you have some experience to share in that area. So I would love for you to just start by giving us a bit of a background about yourself and what your experience as a medical writer is in Singapore.
Hi, yes. My name is Samantha Santagelo. I'm a freelance medical writer. I'm currently based in the US, but I moved to Singapore in 2005 and lived there for 13 years. And while I was there, I worked pretty much nonstop full time as a freelance medical writer. I had some agency experience in London from where I moved to Singapore, a couple of years with Blackwell Healthcare Communications. And then when I first got to Singapore, I was working with a healthcare communications agency called Meditech Media. But it was difficult to maintain the office hours because I had a small child and no childcare. So that's why I transitioned to freelance writing.
Oh, great. Thank you. And so I know we were just chatting before we started the recording about the difference between Singapore English and English, or someone like myself who grew up in England. Um, can you talk a little bit about the potential language barrier that might be there if someone's entering the medical writing field?
Um, Agencies and potential clients, which are likely to be pharmaceutical companies, are generally international and generally require all their materials to be prepared in standard English that is understandable to anybody in the world. So people's English needs to be very strong and grammatically correct. So even though English is one of the official languages of Singapore and is also widely spoken all over Asia, people need to be very strong, particularly in their written English, and make sure that they are completely familiar with correct grammatical writing as opposed to the more colloquial English that is generally spoken.
Mm-hmm. Did you see, so what kind of freelance clients were you working with? Was it more on the commercial side, like advertising, or was it more um, continued education? What kind of clients and work were you doing at the time?
Um, I have a PhD in molecular biology, so I was based more on the clinical and medical side of things. I worked for healthcare communications agencies. There are several in Singapore. Some are kind of international global agencies that have branches in Singapore and Australia. And others were smaller agencies that were, either solely in Singapore or had a couple of branches in, say, the rest of Asia Pacific and Australia. I also worked with clients directly from pharmaceutical companies, but that work normally came about once I had worked with them in an agency setting. And then a few years later, when they'd moved to a different company or a different position, then they could contact me. They would contact me to do something like writing clinical manuscripts. The main types of projects that I did was clinical manuscripts for medical journals. These were normally clinical trial write-ups. So just, results of clinical trials written from clinical study reports or CSRs. I also made slides for conferences and meetings. I made posters for meetings. There are a lot of advisory boards. An advisory board is when a pharmaceutical company gathers together key opinion leaders who are normally doctors with a lot of experience or consultants, and they want to present their latest data that hasn't yet been published to those doctors to ask them how they feel about it. Do they think it's strong? Are they encouraged by it? Do they have any concerns about data that might be missing or not as strong as they would like? So these advisory boards are very common in Singapore and Asia. And so then I would attend those meetings and write up the reports. So the healthcare communications agencies would have arranged the meeting and would have sent me along as the medical writer. During those meetings, I would help with slide preparation, show reel preparation, that kind of thing. And then I'd produce the report for them after that meeting. I did do some more marketing oriented work, and these would be what are called detail aids. So they're kind of brochures or pamphlets, but targeted at doctors. I didn't do much patient targeted work. It was more healthcare targeted writing. And this would be, for example, like a simple brief overview of the data from a clinical study, so that doctors could glance at it and get the key clinical messages. So I did also do a bit of that.
Thank you. That's a really thorough introduction. And I was wondering, so now you said you're based in the US. I'm assuming that you work on similar types of writing projects now, so detail aids and advisory board meetings, slide decks. Has there been a difference in the types of projects that you've seen coming from the US compared to Singapore?
Actually, in the US, it's all been manuscript and conference based. So, but that might also be, I mean, I've only been here a short time, and I've been working with an agency that is mainly focused on conferences and clinical manuscripts. So that would be why. I haven't done any, kind of more commercial stuff since I got here. That was more in Singapore and Asia. I also worked with some agencies that were based in Hong Kong. I think that might be because there's might be slightly less of a pool of work overall. And so an agency might do a lot of different types of materials, which was why I worked on different kinds of materials. Whereas here, there's so much going on because there's so many pharma companies that are based here and in Europe. So they would probably specialize mainly in one aspect, one type of writing or one type of material. And because I haven't, worked with the more commercial oriented agency, that's why I've done less here.
I think that is a really important observation, that because there are less pharma companies based in Singapore, the agencies are likely to be smaller, and there's going to be more diversity in the types of medical writing that you'll be asked to do. Did you also find that the types of work that you did was more driven by what the agency needed and wanted? And I'm not sure how this relates to your approach to freelancing, but some people take the approach of having more of a general type website that covers all their experiences and some samples, and then whatever the client needs, you're able to adapt. And other people will take a more proactive, targeted approach where they'll say, well, I only want to be doing this type of writing or in this type of area, and then they'll kind of reach out directly and look for that type of work. Which of those two is kind of more representative of what your approach was when you were in Singapore?
I mean, when I was in Singapore, because I started out with the healthcare communications agency, and I would actually recommend this to anyone starting out as a medical writer, it's quite important to learn sort of the behind the scenes of what goes on when producing these kinds of materials for pharma companies. And if you've never done it before, you won't necessarily understand as much about like the business development, like how to go about getting the client or how the billing and admin works on their side. And it can be quite complicated. So if you start with an agency, you'll be working with an account manager and you'll learn how to manage an account from working with that account manager. You'll learn how to manage timelines because the pharma company has timelines that are often very tight and very short. And you have to learn how to manage those expectations. You'll be learning at kind of how different people work on different stages on the manuscript. So you'll have, you know, the writer doing it, but then the more senior medical writer might be reviewing it, and you can be learning from that person if you're doing that. And then, of course, there's always the editor who will edit the final version. And again, you can learn a lot from the editor. So I really would recommend that someone starts out in an agency as a medical writer, if they can get that position. And then once they feel that they're confident, they've done a lot of different materials, because again, you want to be doing that because you write differently for a medical journal than you do for a brochure, than you do for a highlight report of a meeting. So all these different types of writing about the same topic with the same data and the same references, you need to learn those different types of writing if you're starting out. So I would recommend trying to get a job with a healthcare communications agency. And then when you feel confident, then you can hang up your shingle. You can also, you know, freelance on the side if there's time, though they may not be, and your contract may preclude that. The main issues are with working with multiple clients is that you have to be sure not to take on projects about competing drugs at the same time, because most contracts forbid you from doing that, obviously, because then you could be using, you know, special marketing techniques or clinical messages from the one and playing them off against the other, and they don't like that at all. So again, if you're working for an agency, that won't be a problem because the business development people will have sorted that out. But when you're working by yourself, it can ethically be a problem if you're approached by two people at the same time to write about competing drugs, because ethically it's not correct to do that. But what you can do is you can work for the one drug and then have what's called a washout period. That's typically about 6 months. Then you can go work on the other drug. There's nothing, you know, your contract will state how long you have between that. And you definitely can't solicit when you're working on drug A. You can't phone up drug B and go, hey, I've got all this cool information.
Yeah.
It's on your drug instead. So that is just something to watch out for.
Yeah, thank you. So then, if your advice to somebody who's living in Singapore and wants to, let's assume that they're entering the medical writing industry for the first time and they have a background in healthcare, maybe they're a pharmacist or a physician or some kind of healthcare practitioner or maybe a researcher, and they want to take that medical knowledge and be a writer, how might they get that first agency full-time role? And I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear from you first. What do you think are the most important things that they should focus on in trying to land that first full-time role at an agency?
I mean, first, they need to be realistic in terms of the fact that they're starting out. So they're going to they can only aim for starter medical writer positions. The learning curve will be quite steep. I think the best thing is there are many healthcare communications agencies. I mean, I don't know if you want to, you know, mention them or make a list of them for someone, but and the good news is that because they're based in Singapore and they normally have a global branch somewhere else, there's normally people needed. People need medical writers, and there are not many who are based in Singapore because the population is smaller. So there will be a need for medical writers. They just have to go through all the different healthcare communications agencies and contact them. The thing you want to impress them with is that you will normally be given a writing test, which is probably writing an abstract or writing a report or something. You want to do your best to ace that. You want to have no errors in grammar, no errors in spelling. You want to make sure that everything is consistent. So don't use half English spelling, half American spelling. Make sure that you either use completely UK spelling or completely US spelling. So attention to detail is paramount. You want to make absolutely sure that you meet whatever deadline they set you, and you want to make absolutely sure that you stick to the brief. So see what they've asked of you and make sure that you deliver that and nothing else. So I think when you're starting out, because you won't have material, unless you've written papers and published papers under your own name, that's always helpful to have something like that. But unless you have that, those are the kinds of things you're going to start out. And you're going to start out, the pay is not going to be enormous, and you're just going to have to prove yourself. But then you build up a portfolio, right? So every time you finish a piece of work, save it and keep it as an example of your work for the next job or the next position. If you work on a manuscript and it gets published, put that in your file of, documents that you've prepared. So keep every piece, as long as it's not a meeting highlight report. You can't send out an advisory board report as an example of your work because that's proprietary information. But if it's something that's published or in the public domain or handed out to doctors, it's fine for you to use that and as an example of work and use it to build your portfolio. So while you're gaining the experience of working in these teams of people that will include medical writers, account managers, business development directors, editors, illustrators, the design people, you'll be working in a big team like that. Learn how those dynamics work and collect your writing. And then once you've got a nice range of that, then that will help you to get future jobs, and it'll also help you get positions in other companies. It's fine to jump from one agency to the other. I mean, there's so many people that just hop from one agency to the other and they need a change or a different, scenery or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great advice. I actually run a small communications agency in Canada, and we have our own writing test that we send out when we're hiring. And the amount of people that don't follow the brief when they're completing that test, it really is a make or break thing, and it is so important that you follow exactly the instructions. The point about consistency as well in the spelling, in the writing style, the format is really, really important. I see even resumes that don't have consistency in terms of how they're written and how they've been punctuated, and immediately I don't want to take it any further. um, I think one thing I'd love to ask you, so obviously if anyone's watching this video now, they are currently enrolled with Prospology, which means they have access to myself and the other coaches that they would work with. And one thing that we do work with our students on is developing pieces for their portfolio. So a lot of people come to us, they don't really have any writing samples, they're trying to get their first full-time position or their first couple of freelance clients. And so if somebody is based in Singapore, and they're looking to get into an agency for the first time, and they're able to create some writing samples with myself supporting them and able to show them examples and teach them, what kind of samples do you think would be most impactful? What kind of writing could they do? Whether it's a real drug and just something that doesn't end up being published, or something that's made up, but just to demonstrate that they have that skill set.
I've never done anything like that. I mean, one thing could be to find an article in a medical journal that for some reason, whether it's the journal's format or style, doesn't have an abstract, and write a 250-word abstract of that article. Might work for a review article. Most a clinical trial or original research articles would already have an abstract. But if they can find a review article that doesn't have an abstract, they could write an abstract of it. They could make up some kind of detail aid, which is take a couple of, take several clinical studies about the same drug and then prepare a 2 to 4 page brochure that highlights the efficacy and safety of that drug. So you want to show that this drug works in these and these clinical trials. You want to say what the key methods, how the clinical trials differed or what they were looking at, their primary endpoints and secondary endpoints. And then how it worked, like how it was this much better than the comparator. So depending on the disease area or the drug it was compared with or a placebo, you want to show that, for example, in oncology, it led to this much increase in overall survival or progression-free survival. And the major side effects were these and these, and you would show those potentially in a graph to show which were the most common side effects. And then you could put the 3 different trials showing that the same side effect occurred at the most frequent across all 3 trials. So you could do something like that. But honestly, I think if you're starting out, people aren't expecting you to have anything. They're going to judge you on your writing test and they're going to judge you on the interview. So it's very difficult to start out if you don't have, experience. So I think that because people are looking for medical writers in Singapore, they're looking for experienced medical writers, but they're always they should be ready to take on someone who wants to start and shows potential. So if you've written reports in your lab or in your job, if you've got reports that you've written in your job, that's perfect. Send those. If you've had to write a grant proposal, if you've written even lab reports that aren't confidential, reports for your senior in the lab or reports on something for somebody, send it because people can judge your fluidity, how well you write. Is your English very stilted? Is it ungrammatical or does it flow? Do you have a good style that's easy to read? Your covering letter, write not too long. No one has time to wade through 4 pages of screen, but just write an interesting, original, grammatical, well-written covering letter, and that will help them. And then just reach out, go on the websites of these companies and reach out, preferably to the Singapore-based HR person. If there isn't an HR person in Singapore, just look at the personnel on the website and go to an account manager. They're not that, if they don't have huge staffs, but just go to someone in the therapy area that, if they're listing it by therapy area, or if they're not, just write to them out the blue, send them your CV, send them one example of work if you have one, and see what happens. Because to me, that's the best way. People are looking for medical writers in Singapore. So even if you're going to just be prepared to start at the beginning, and you'll be able to move your way up.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. And that's really what we set people up to do, making sure that their cover letter, their LinkedIn, their resume, any samples that they have, it's all consistent and strong. And it really shows them that they know, that they're keen, that they have some experience, some awareness of what would be required of them. So it sounds like familiarity with the types of projects that they would be asked to do would also go a long way. If, for example, working with Prospology, we can show them examples of projects that have been written for clients and get them familiar with the copy decks and how everything is presented and where everything comes from and the referencing and annotation and that side of things. What if somebody is more keen on working on the promotional side? So they really like writing for lay audiences and converting the more scientific data into like patient brochures and posters and ads and things like that. Do you think that would be a different approach at all?
Yes, because as I said, you need your English style is going to be completely different. You're going to be explaining things very clearly, very simply. I mean, what they could do is look at brochures that they might find in their doctor's office and see how, and then read free to access articles of PubMed. So get the brochure from a doctor's office for a particular drug, okay? And then look at the back and you'll probably find a reference. Get that reference off of PubMed and hope it's free, or even order it, it's $30. And then see what the medical journal article, how it was written and how it presented the data and how it has been distilled to make this brochure. And that will show you immediately how the data that are presented initially and published initially are distilled and written, and you'll see the differences in style. You'll see how, you know, a 4,000 to 6,000 word article is distilled into 2 pages with a total of about 100 words of text. You know, it's not easy. I find it very difficult writing patient-based materials because I'm like up there in the science and the meds.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me to distill that into 100 words that is understandable by someone with with a sort of 13 to 14-year-old, you know, that's difficult to do without speaking to them like you sound like there's something wrong with them. It's like,
Yes.
you've got to tread a very fine balance of treating your, you know, informing your reader clearly and explaining it so it really doesn't sound very good.
Patronizing, yes. Yeah, no, that's a really great piece of advice. I think that's very useful. Um, and then I was wondering, you know, obviously there's a wide range of different salaries depending on where you are in your career, but do you potentially have a range, maybe like roughly what a starting salary might be for someone who's very junior, just coming into an agency versus someone who's been working as a medical writer in Singapore for 10, 20 years?
Because I was a freelance writer since 2005, I really don't know what the salaries were or are. I know that freelance medical writers can get from about 80 Singapore dollars an hour to around 120 Singapore dollars an hour. But again, that was based on many years of experience. So trying to think, I mean, and again, 2005 is a long time ago, and so salaries would have been different, like maybe, no, I'm sorry, I can't guess because in 2020, I don't know what the agencies are paying them. What you could do is, I'm assuming once you've found, I mean, they would just be able to ask, you know, the person. What I recommend though is don't ask straight off the bat. It doesn't good. I mean, certainly not in our culture. And in Singapore, it depends who's interviewing you. If an expat is interviewing you, they won't like it. If Singaporean, the third or fourth question is, what's the salary? They want to show your interest, your dedication, what you're prepared to do there. Don't start talking about how I want to manage this many people in 2 years' time, because that is something that is recognized in Singapore, that people come straight out of university or are new in a field and they immediately want to be a manager. And it just does not impress the hiring person at all. They want to see that you're prepared to start at the bottom, put in the work. You could progress very quickly depending on how good you are at your job. But before you start talking to them about how long before I can become a manager, how long before I can become a principal medical writer, how long before I can become a lead medical writer, it just doesn't look good. You're starting out. You haven't even done your first project for them. You know what I mean? They will tell you the salary. And I think it's not, it depends, because I don't know what people are earning in their current job as a pharmacist or as a medic. So it's difficult to tell. The hours will be long because when you work for an agency, if they're very tight deadlines, they're going to want you to meet them. If the agency has several clients who each have impossible deadlines and you happen to be working on 2 or 3 papers and all 3, company A, B, and C, all have something they want handed in by Friday, you have to somehow make it happen. But it's also great because the people in agencies are fun to work with. They're normally interesting people. There's great team spirit. People will work together to get things done. So it's actually an enjoyable environment to work in, I've found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so one thing that has come through actually in conversations with our students based in Singapore is that the job descriptions for full-time medical writers will say fast-paced environment, fast-paced, and so I've often been asked the question, well, what does that mean exactly? Because if someone's working full-time in a hospital, for example, fast paced means something different to them. And so you mentioned, there might be deadlines that kind of happen simultaneously. What do you think fast paced really means from an agency perspective?
Okay, so it depends on the type of project you're working on. So it could be that you're working on conference materials. The conference is happening on the 3rd of March, whether or not you're ready. So that client might have engaged you to make, a slide set, some patient materials, some healthcare provider materials. And particularly if it's a conference, the conference has deadlines. So submission is 12 midnight EST on Thursday. It just is. If you miss it, it's gone and you can't submit. That will really anger the pharma company. So those deadlines are real. Then you will also get a pharmaceutical client whose personal mission it is to publish this clinical study by the 1st of March. But they only got the budget on the 1st of December. So they will insist that this paper is written and submitted normally to a journal that has no hope of getting into, but they will insist, and you have to meet that deadline or you lose the client and the $1 million business that they bring to your agency. You might be working on paper A and paper B, and unfortunately, both completely separate people will want those papers in by the 1st of March. On top of that, you may have started paper A in April of last year. They wanted it published by, October, but then the author didn't review it in time, and then there was a delay because they wanted to get more data. And so then 3 or 4 projects might get backed up, and now the client's really hopping mad and absolutely wants it in by the 1st of March. And you, unfortunately, happen to be working on 3 of those projects that different clients want by the 1st of March. That can get a little stressful, and that is what is meant by fast-paced. It's like you have to do it. That's just the way it is. And so you will then be putting in extra hours during that period. Then there may be some time where there's no budget. The pharmaceutical companies have all run out of budget, so they're not hiring. So you'll be sitting there with not enormous amounts of work to do until they get more budget and new sets of work and new projects come in. So it can vary depending on the type of work, how many clients your agency works with, and how amenable your clients are to you managing their timelines to make things a little less tense. But that's why it's sometimes also better to be working for an agency, because you're not personally responsible if that deadline's not met. If you're working as a freelancer, then it's just you. And if if your individual projects, it can be quite tricky juggling projects as a freelancer because there's nobody between you and the client. You can't hide behind the rest of your company. It's you by yourself, and you signed a contract saying that you would deliver. So you have to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's really important to set realistic expectations
Mm,
for the clients as well when you're freelancing, because especially if you work full time, you need to be clear upfront with them what the scope of the project is and what the timelines are. Because if you have deadlines for your full-time job and then you have people pushing you for things to get done outside of that, it can become very unmanageable. And I know that personally, when I started as a freelancer, I was freelancing full time, and I noticed a huge difference in how receptive the agencies were to working with me, because they knew that I was going to be available whenever they needed me. Because oftentimes they want to pull you into a brief, or they have something that's due tomorrow, or somebody's trying to do something and they haven't done a good job, and then they need you to fix it. And so if you're working full-time hours, it can be challenging to then figure out how to add to that. And so I wonder if there are certain types of clients that might be more geared towards um, being a better fit for somebody if they have a full-time job.
I mean, do you mean a full-time medical writing job and then freelancing on the side?
Yeah.
I can recommend it if you're starting out, because if you're working a 40-hour week or a 40 to 50-hour week for your full-time job, you're not going to be able to do a good job for someone else on the side. It's not great. So until you really know what you're doing, I wouldn't recommend it. Um, yeah, it's just because you really want to start out being able to prove yourself and impress your clients. Because my best clients were people who just came back year after year. Like 3 or 4 years would come by and then they'd email me and go, hey, I'm now this position with this company, long time no see. So now I'm doing oncology. What are your commitment levels? I'm like, hey, I'm free. What do you want me to do? And so previously they'd be on diabetes. And so you want your repeat clients, you want people that know that you are reliable, like absolutely reliable. They want to know that you write well, obviously, that's the first requirement. And they want you to know that they can count on you to deliver, because they're normally calling on you because they need something done and they need it fast and they need it done properly and they don't want to have to send it back 14 times for corrections or reviews or things. So I would not suggest, I mean, the way I started out freelancing was because I left the company full-time position and then they took me on as a freelancer. And then initially I was lucky enough, like I worked as a sole freelancer for them. So it meant that they benefited because they didn't have, I was paid by the hour. And again, there's two schools of thought in the US that people get paid by the project or paid by the hour. I personally firmly believe in being paid by the hour because clients change their mind all the time. They change the scope of the project all the time. They change the data that they're going to include in the project all the time. If you've set a particular price for a project, it's very high, and that's their budget, right? So if you need an extra $5,000 because you've gone way over, they're not going to have it in their budget to give you. But if you tell them this manuscript will take 80 to 120 hours to write, I will bill you per hour, preferably monthly. Make sure you get paid monthly, not at the end, not at milestones. If they only pay by milestone, you want to set milestones from the beginning. Don't wait until the project is finished. Some projects take 2 years to finish. You want to set very clear milestones, but preferably you want to set up the ability to bill them monthly so that you've got income, right? You need the money to be coming in. And let me tell you, there are some clients that make it difficult to pay freelancers. Like there was one agency that was very difficult to get money out of them. And the people I spoke to said, yeah, we've got protocols in place to delay paying freelancers. And they would feel terrible, because I would be saying to them, how would you feel if your paycheck didn't hit your bank account on the 25th of every month? Why is it any different for me because I'm a freelancer? So you want to set, when you're a freelancer, you can talk about money, that's fine. It's just when you're applying to a job that you don't want to jump into the money talk until you're getting close to being offered the position.
I think that's really great advice. So it sounds like the best approach would be to put all of your focus on to getting this first full-time position, and maybe spending the first at least 6 months or so just showing them what you can do, learning, meeting all the deadlines, just being very diligent and hardworking, and taking whatever salary they offer you. And then maybe once you feel a bit more comfortable and in the swing of things, you might start looking into freelance on the side. But then, you know as you mentioned, when you first start working with the freelance clients, you really need to be impressing them, and you need to show up for them as well. So it's getting into that mentality of, I'm committing to this company, and I'm going to have to do whatever they need from me, on top of the deadlines that I already have. So yeah, I
I mean,
think.
you could even tell your current lot that you really wanting to move into freelance, and what's the possibility of them taking you on a freelance basis.
Yes, yes, that's what I was gonna say as well. I think that's a great idea. Um, I was actually in the opposite position when I first started. Like, the agency wanted to hire me full time, but I said, how about we start on a freelance basis and see how it goes? And then if you still want to offer me full time and I want to work full time, we can do that. But I ended up saying no, full time isn't for me. And I decided to continue as a freelancer. That wasn't what they were looking for or what they needed. So it just kind of ended up being a springboard into the other clients that I ended up working with. But yeah, I think it works the other way around too. Like you said, once you build that relationship and that trust with them, you can then say, well, I still am happy to keep working on these accounts, but maybe with less hours, but then you only pay me for the hours that I spend. So it's actually in their interest as well. Um, so that could be a great way to transition out of full time, knowing that you have this one solid client that's kind of paying your bills that you can then build on top of with other clients.
And as I said, I mean, it's actually, I think if you're just really starting out, there's nothing to beat learning from an agency, learning, because you'll learn pretty fast and you'll learn a lot of things, like all those different things I talked about, like the different aspects that go into producing these different pieces. The other thing when you're freelancing is you want to hook up with a designer. So, I mean, I know a very good one in Singapore, and I'm still in contact with him, and he's my very good friend, and he's a very good designer. Um, so if people need, then I can, give them his details. But you want to be working with a designer, because when you're freelance, you're not going to have that studio behind you. And if your client, especially if you do want to be getting into patient targeted or healthcare marketing type materials, you're going to need someone to make those flashy graphics and to make your slides look groovy and fabulous and stylish and edgy. That, unless you have those skills, which is great, make sure that your PowerPoint skills are excellent. Make sure that you know how to draw all manner of types of graphs in Excel, because you will be required to do that. I'm still Googling how to draw certain types of graphs now as they, what is that? Literally this week, I'm like, what is a violin plot? No way. Never seen one before. So, you're always learning and building on your skills. So just make sure your PowerPoint and Excel skills are very good, as well as Word. Like, make sure you know how to use Word properly inside and out, all the shortcuts, all the advanced types of tools. That's also something you can be doing now while, building yourself up and training yourself to take that first job.
Hmm. Yeah, the partnership with a designer is a great point. And I know on the promotional side of things as well, it would usually be an art director that you would partner with as a copywriter in the healthcare space. And it's a similar thing where you know, they take that copy and they add the layout, the design.
But it works both ways because he sends me work. He's like, hey, Sam,
Mm,
needs this and this. I can't write this stuff. You want to write it? I'll do the pictures. And they pay the more marketing people, they pay a lot for comparatively less, right? Because writing 100 words, it's going to take you shorter than writing 4,000 words in a manuscript, right? So the pay is quite good if you're working on, you know, more marketing oriented stuff. And that designer will pass on work that he can't take on. And he's also got contacts. And if he trusts you as a writer, and if you impress, you know, if your work impresses the client, then he's going to remember you and contact you next time he gets past something, but he doesn't have time or doesn't know anyone else to ask. But the other part to mention is when you freelance, you really do have to work on people skills and being able to manage and tread the fine line between a very, very busy, tense, overworked client who is the customer and is therefore always right, even when they are completely wrong. You will have authors, key opinion leaders who have very big egos, are very important and must be treated with absolute deference at all times, even when they wreck your perfect paper and
mm-hmm.
rewrite it in Asian English when you've just worked so hard to get it in perfect actual English. So you've got to be able to then fix it tactfully so that nobody loses face. It's all about saving face in Asia, and you know, your Singaporean students will know very well about this and they will be very good at it. It's a lot harder for us expats to learn that. But they're going to have to be pleasing different people with different demands. Oh, and then overall, if it's a manuscript, the journal will have requirements. So your client can want to say this and that, and your author may want to say this and that, but the journal doesn't allow it. That's great, because then you can just say journal doesn't allow it. Sorry, can't. But just be very well aware of all the different journals requirements. And again, you look those up the minute you start working on that paper. You know, it's not difficult. You go on the journal author requirements page or author guidelines. They'll tell you that. But again, you've just got to be aware that you've got to please the client and the author. And when you in working with the pharmaceutical client, you've got to please the medical and scientific side and the commercial side. They have very different opinions of how things should be said. And you have to bear in mind your ethics. You can't be saying the drug was safe and tolerable when 40% of the patients died. They will want you to say the drug was safe and tolerable because the other side effects were just headache, but the fact remains is 40% of the patients died. It's not safe or tolerable. You can't be saying that, and you have to tell them tactfully that they can't and why they can't. And another suggestion is this. So just offer a solution. Like when everything's going wrong, offer an alternative solution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A couple more questions, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I was having a discussion with MDAD, who is our psychometric analysis expert. He works as an occupational psychologist, and he was looking into the Singapore culture in the workplace. And one discussion that we had was about authority figures in Singapore, and perhaps there's a difference there in terms of not speaking out if you have someone who's managing you. Maybe you need to be more respectful of people in more senior positions than yourself. I don't know if you've seen that at all, or if that's reflective of the culture in Singapore.
You know, in healthcare communications agencies, it's normally quite an international mix. And so because for the expats, they're quite used to challenging authority and so on, the culture is that if you see an issue or if you want to raise a concern about how the project is being done, there's nothing wrong with doing that. biggest the biggest cultural difference is that because sometimes in Singapore the education system trains people to do what they're told and to study what the material they are given rather than challenge it. Um, some people come into the workplace not able to think outside the box. In medical writing, it's very important to be able to think outside the box because the client is looking for new, fresh ways to present material. They want to be wowed, they want to be impressed. So you're going to have to think outside the box. This is if we're talking about more marketing-oriented material. So just have ideas. You don't have to challenge, but you can say, you know, may I make a suggestion, and then make it. It's people are not that hierarchical. What people don't like is when someone comes in brand new and then starts talking about managing. Just put that aside for now, learn, but you need to be creative. You need to have suggestions. The more suggestions you have, the more you will be remembered, the more people will notice you and see your potential and want to put you forward or promote you. So sitting quietly and doing what you're told is not going to stand you in good stead. If someone, obviously when you're new, you can't be going around telling people what to do, but ask questions, ask questions. People are very loath to ask questions in Singapore because they think it makes them look stupid. It doesn't. It makes people understand that they know what they're talking about and they want to know more about what they're talking about. It is extremely important to ask questions. If you don't know, just ask. No one's going to judge you for asking, and that is how you're going to get ahead, particularly if there are a lot of expats and if you're working with European and US offices, because a lot of these international ones will have European and US offices, and you may be required to attend meetings that are, for global teams. So it's important to stand out. Don't just sit quietly in a corner and nod yes. Yes, learn. Yes, do what you're told, but there's nothing wrong with asking questions. And if you have a concern or you want to challenge something and you're new, pose it as a question. Say, would it work if, or, so I had an idea, does this make sense, or are we not doing that kind of thing? You can pose it however tentatively you want to, but yes, speak up. I mean, don't be a pain, but definitely you must speak up. It's very important. That's how you're going to be remembered, and that's how you're going to move forward.
Yes, no, I think that's a great point. And when I was
Don't
first,
challenge a key opinion leader when you're that's the one thing. On a meeting with an important doctor, that may not be the time to test out your new challenging. If necessary, speak to your account director and say, listen, this guy has said this and this, but I don't think this is right. Do you think we could? Or speak to the client and say, Dr. So-and-so said this, but my concerns are that it conflicts with the journal this, or it's not strictly a fully correct sentence. Okay, so you don't get to challenge the doctor. Unless you're a freelancer, then challenge away. If a freelance, if an important doctor has hired you, you can challenge all you want. He's hired you for your expertise. You're the expert. He's the medical expert. You're the writing expert. So that's fine, But if you're in an agency situation and there's clients and everyone, let the doctor say what he wants and then raise your concerns privately in your agency, and they will take it to the client.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I was just going to say, I had that similar experience when I was first starting out. I felt like if I asked too many questions, people would know that I didn't know what I was doing. But then over time, when I became more confident, I realized that asking questions is the best way to show that you do know what you're doing. Because if you're thinking ahead, okay, well, I'm going to need this information and I'm going to get to this point, and this might not happen the way you think it will. And it shows that you have experience, that you can that you can understand what it is that they need from you.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than saying, I need this and this. Oh, and another thing, I need this. And then the next
Yeah,
day, oh no, now I need this. You know, try
exactly.
and if, especially when you're gathering data, and you'll learn fast enough what you need. And again, this is something you'll speak to your account managers. You know, say, I need this, and this. It's fine. It's better that you ask for 8 things in once than send 8 separate emails, because that's going to annoy people. But
Yeah.
ask and ask for everything you think might possibly be needed in terms of data, in terms always, oh, and my key thing is always work out the motivation behind the piece. So what is, if it's a journal article, it's going to be about a clinical study and they want to showcase the safety and efficacy of the drug. Or it's a review article. So if it's a review article, what are the key messages that this review article, what is the angle that it's taken? It's like a journalism article, right? So what is the angle we're taking? That all these drugs are good, all these drugs are bad, all these drugs are dangerous, these drugs are better than those drugs. Whether it's a manuscript or a commercial piece, the client will have key clinical messages. Okay, so they want to say something like, this drug prolongs survival. This drug prolongs survival, particularly in old people or people with diabetes or people who didn't have this risk factor. They want to maybe push the safety. This drug has less side effects than other drug. This drug is easier to administer. The pills are smaller. The injection is less or the needle is shorter. You know, there's a formulation, so you can take it as a pill instead of as an injection. So they've always got a key clinical message, and the commercial people are going to be wanting to push those key clinical messages. And if it's not a marketing piece, then you're still going to be putting those clinical messages, but you're going to be writing them differently. They're going to be your conclusion in the manuscript, but they're going to be written in a different language than the 3 bullet points on the last or the first page of your brochure.
Yeah, it's a completely different audience, a completely different use. And I do think it's important that all of that is clarified up front whenever you're starting on a project. I
And the
completely
other thing
agree.
is ask for an example. Like, say you're starting out in an agency and someone hands you a clinical study report and says, write a manuscript outline. And you're just like, okay, where do I start? Say, do you have an example of an outline of a manuscript from another project or from the same project? Just if they're an agency, they will have examples of every possible thing you've done. So just say, to make sure that I, meet your agency standards or I'm consistent with the agency style or house style, say, can you please give me a couple of examples of work? Because that's so much easier. Because then you can see how they write their bullets, how they phrase everything, how the flow of content goes, what types of figures are required, if figures are required. Do you have to make them in PowerPoint? What are they supposed to look like? So just get examples. They will have examples. And because you work for the agency, you are fully entitled to see them. You may not understand yet how the filing system works, but just go to the person at the next desk and say, hey, I don't know how to write an outline. Can you give me some outlines so I can follow that? And following other examples. I mean, even now when I'm asked to write types, I will still be saying, can you give me an example? Particularly if it's a new therapy area that I'm not familiar with, or if it's a new type of, like someone wants to, you have to write a commentary, or someone will ask you to write the cover letter for submitting a manuscript to a journal. Just say, great, are there any other examples of cover letters? So you can see the style and the tone and how long and what type of material has to go in. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
submitting this manuscript, it's about this, these key points about it. I hope you will consider my submission. Thanks, bye. You know what I mean? So it's very easy when you're in an agency to get other examples of work, and then you can just look at those and make your piece look like that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I still do all the time. As an agency, when we have new clients and it's a nuanced kind of project and they have a new client, like it's a pharma company that they haven't worked with before, then everybody wants to make sure that they're getting what they want. So examples is absolutely the best
Mm.
way. Templates as well, anything that you can use to just make sure that the formatting is right, the language is right, and style guides as well for a brand. Um, I'm conscious of time. My last question. So, people who are based in the US and Canada, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll join an association, for example, the American Medical Writers Association, and they'll have a profile on there, which is like a database so that clients can look for medical writers that have particular skill sets. Um, and I was wondering if someone's based in Singapore, is there anything that's comparable to that in terms of like an organization, an association, a database?
I don't know because I I found all my clients through word of mouth. What I would suggest is staying in contact with people. So if you're working in an agency and you deal with the client, take their card and keep track of them on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn. And if they move to another company, keep track of them because they will know you and they will know your work. So it'll take a little bit of time, but say they move from pharma company A to pharma company B, even if it's in Hong Kong or Korea or somewhere else in Asia Pacific, keep track of that and then contact them and go, hey, I see you got a new role. Congratulations. Let me know, remember we worked on this in this year. Let me know if you're ever looking for someone to help out. So I didn't even have a website. I think I was on LinkedIn, when it started up, I joined it. But I literally just would occasionally remind people of who I was and what I was doing and that I was available to help them out. Um, Again, contact all the different agencies. It's a small world. There's like 6 or 8 of them, and just be on their books when you start out as a medical writer. Just say, my rates are this. Tell them your rates, your hourly rate, and say, I do this, this, and this. And then send them Chinese New Year greetings, send them Christmas greetings. Just keep in touch with contacts. And over time, those contacts will keep, and then every time they give you a piece of work, deliver it to gold star service, gold star everything. They will remember you and they will use you. So that to me is the way I went about getting work. I don't know of a medical writing association in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, maybe, but but I'm not sure. They, people are going to be going through the agencies. So the healthcare communications agencies, you just want to be on their books and reminding them of your existence.
Yeah.
Before that happens, and then maybe get a recommendation or two in LinkedIn. Like maybe get your direct manager to write you a recommendation on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or someone, even not your direct manager, someone who's worked with you on the same team, like, hey, so and so is always there, really great to work with, never lets me down, that kind
Yeah.
of thing, because it just makes you stand out slightly.
Yeah, definitely. And it
And get
sounds
it
like,
from your existing people before you go into medical writing. So get
mm-hmm.
a current person, if they can make a comment that's like, like always delivers reports on time or is always on time, always writes very clearly, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like because you, as you were saying, the population is smaller in Singapore, and if you're in the with the agencies, everything's going to be going through them anyway. So it's kind
There
of
will always
most,
be someone who knows you from another agency because they've moved from agency A to B.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen that as well. In Toronto, even where I'm based now, it's really a small industry once you've been in it for a little while. I've definitely seen that, and I think networking is so important for that reason. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. I mean, you have blown me away by how much of your insights and experiences you've shared, and I really appreciate your help. Do you have any final words or a summary or any final comments before we end?
I really love freelancing because it gives me freedom. I never get bored because I can pick the projects that are interesting to me. If a particular project or client is difficult or frustrating or boring, I know that it's not forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really interesting. What I loved about freelancing in Asia was you got to travel. Well, obviously not so much right now because of COVID. There's a lot of scope for working with people from different countries. You learn a lot about different cultures. You learn a lot about, you will one day be able to travel again. You'll just get to Korea and then you have to hop to Hong Kong, maybe Vietnam. It's great. So it's a very exciting and interesting area to be in, and I enjoy it very much, and I'm happy to answer any further questions in the future if anybody has them.
Thank you so much, Samantha. This has been so amazing. I can't wait to share it with our students and incorporate what you've said into our coaching programs. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're very lucky to have you.
You're welcome. And as I said, anytime if you have any other questions, just let me know, okay?
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.